So can I just welcome everyone back after the screen break? And just a reminder that GenTORE publications are open access, and that this video and this training will be therefore available, basically open access on the GenTORE website. So I'm conscious that there are 1 or 2 people who have joined later, so the first session therefore is still going to be available, and all this will be together therefore to view basically on the GenTORE website. So we'll upload this, it might not be today, but we'll upload it as soon as we can, and therefore there will be the information from today will be available then. So what we'd like to do now is to move to the second part of the training, and we're going to move therefore from looking at precision livestock farming and resilience and efficiency ranking and definitions, and actually look how we can use the sensor data to develop on-farm tools and therefore look at that precision phenotyping opportunity. Thanks, Ines, if you'd like to move on to the next slide 2. So we're going to look at these key sort of questions and therefore learning outcomes today. And it'll be a similar pattern with a presentation from Ines Adriens from Wageningen and Leuven, and then Isabella Laura from UniPD will present basically in plenary session, and then we'll have 2 breakout groups again, just as before, but we'll do the polling the same as last time, so we can share the results to discuss those. But we will have an overall plenary discussion to finish off as well today. So there will be a chance for discussions in the chat as an overall group as well. So the second session, we're looking to see how we can use those big data and how they're influenced by resilience and efficiency, and how we can use them to make those herd and individual support tools. So thank you, Ines. Do you want to move on to the next slide? And I think I'll probably hand over to you if that's okay at this point. And thank you again to the technical team and everyone for their work so far. Thanks.
Thank you, John. So hi everybody, my name is Ines Adriens, and I will speak a little bit more about how we actually implemented within work package 3 of GenTORE some of the concepts using big data and sensor technology to say something about resilience. And the first thing we needed to establish was how are we going to actually have a gold standard? What is for us resilience that we can predict possibly with sensor data? And like John already said before, what is that we actually started from the ability to recalve, measured by the number of calvings, and then added some penalty and bonus point scores for traits such as good fertility, good health, and good reproduction, all measured by information that we can that we have available on the farm. So the advantage from this is that we can have this information rather objectively, and that they should be available or recorded on many farms over time, and so that many data are available as a sort of a basis, a gold standard. So I will not bore you with the details of the equations that we came up with, but basically what you need to keep in mind is that we try to gather this information based on what is already there, and that we started from the idea, okay, let's establish a core equation, and that is then using all the most essential and commonly available data, but that this is potentially not the ground truth, and that also adapted equations based on the farm situation are possible. So for example, by addition of available other sensor-based data that says something about the resilience. So within work package 3, the aim was to use big data from already available commercially available sensors And that means using sensors such as the body weight or the body condition score, sensors that measure feeding or rumination behavior, activity, milk yield, milk parameters, temperature, and so on and so on. And these sensors typically measure the characteristics of these cows, or certain characteristics, at a very high frequency. But just the data is, of course, not enough. We need to derive some proxies that are meaningful from these sensor time series. And within workbench 3, we focus mainly on activity and milk yields, because these are, of course, the most abundantly available sensors. By defining these proxies, I also really wanted to show a little bit the challenges that are there. On one hand, because of the data reliability and, okay, from a biological perspective, what you expect. And on the other hand, also, it can be really a trade-off between what information is contained in the sensor features and what the complexity is to really derive or calculate. So we find it quite a challenge that that it's not always what you expect that happens in the data that is also really happening, and sometimes this needs to be tackled a little bit differently. So here you see, for example, for three plots from quarter milk yields, so milk yields production, milk production measured at the quarter level, and you indeed expect kind of a lactation curve in the normal situation. And when there is something happening, for example, a case of mastitis, a quarter gets infected, you expect a deviation, a perturbation that recovers after time. And then what we also see in the data is that sometimes these deviations don't recover, and then you need to quantify these deviations in a very different way than when you when the time series actually behaves as expected. Another thing that we needed to take into account is, for example, the occurrence of missing data. So that can be due to the fact that there is a problem. For example, when a cow stops giving milk because of an infection in the udder, then you can, of course, measure absolutely nothing. Sometimes there is very nicely seen what we expect. Sometimes there's not. The same for conductivity. So again, here on the middle and the right, there are two cases of clinical mastitis. You expect the conductivity to go up during a clinical case of mastitis, but sometimes the milk production deviates so much that actually the things that can be measured are just completely unexpectedly. So this really limits or challenges how to interpret these time series, and these are things that we need to take into account. And this is another example. So this time from activity. So the blue time series is raw activity data, and at a certain point in time there is a shift of the activity of the cow. You would expect that maybe it's change of environment, but there can be perfectly just something in the sensor or something in the cow. You don't really know, and you need to take these kind of things into account when interpreting. What we actually are looking for is, of course, for example, the spikes that you see indicated with the green arrows that can indicate heat behavior. And there, of course, one of the remarks I wanted to make there is that using fixed thresholds on these sensor data for automated interpretation are rarely the solution. And then the interpretation itself. So if you come up with a certain feature of these time series, for example, the variance, it doesn't mean that a similar number always is a similar interpretation, or always has a similar interpretation. For example, both time series are daily milk yields time series, shown here left and right, they have the same kind of variance, the same number, but in one there might be just a problem with the sensor, but in the other there is potentially, for example, a health problem happening that you can see very clearly in the data. Do we want to interpret these data similarly? If we are going to summarize, it's pretty hard to discriminate between both cases. So as I said before, there is always a trade-off between the complexity and the informativity of how we want to interpret this sensor data. And within work package 3, we came up with 2 types of sensor features. One type you can really calculate for all possible sensor time series without that you need to have real process knowledge. So you're not particularly looking for perturbations or for spikes in activity. And we consider these the type A, the curve parameters, and they describe more or less the overall behavior throughout the lactation and are rather easy to calculate. And so we have also lower data requirements in terms of quality and missing data. And then within work package 3, we implemented those such that they are calculated relative to the herd peers, and that we just subtract a time series trend, and then just generally summarize the behavior of the residual curve. And then the more complex and potentially also a bit more informative sensor features we considered were the type B, that look specifically for certain dynamics, such as perturbations, such as how recovery happens, and so on and so on. These are less easy to calculate and have more strict data requirements, and so were only calculated not for all sensors available, but only for the milk yield and the activity sensor features, sensor series, and they quantify things like lactation shape and perturbations and so on. So to give an example of this, we really first, so this is a milk yield curve, and we derived 30 biologically meaningful in the sense that they say something about shape, variability, and perturbations, features of milk yield. And for example, this includes the length and the steepness of development and recovery phases. And then for activity time series, we calculated 15 features that start from the daily activity data and then says something about short-term changes, which typically mean cows that show or display some estrus behavior, and long-term changes that can be related to, for example, changes due to health problems or I say something like clot problems that the cows just don't want to move anymore. And then in the next step, we wanted to see how good these features can predict the resilience equation as we put together before. So remember, it's like in function of the ability to recalve, but also takes into account fertility, health, and milk production. And so the outcome is the resilience score within a farm, and the predictors are then the different sensor features. And initially, we assumed that on different farms, similar physiological features that are reflected in the proxies would determine the resilience rank, longevity, and productive lifespan. And what we did for that was evaluate our prediction performance based on how good we could predict certain animals in the correct category or in the opposite category. And with that, we mean that a highly resilient cow was predicted as high and a lowly resilient cow was predicted as low. And what we found was that we could obtain a good prediction performance overall, but that it's rather dependent on, so which features were included and were predictive, dependent on the farm. So we couldn't come up with a common equation across all farms, which was what we kind of initially expected. And one of the reasons or the explanations for that is that current data, if we look into detail in these time series, shows that farmers do not particularly use same evaluation criteria for culling. And that can be over time, even over time, that some farmers just don't use, for example, deviations in milk yield or perturbations to cull the cow. So this is a highly repetitive, perturbed. So this is data from one cow in different parities, and you see that the milk yield really strongly deviates. Can be, for example, because of claw problems or lameness, and that the farmer just keeps this cow in the herd, apparently because she is able to get pregnant again. So what might then be an ideal way to select the cow is based on a combination of both her genomic potential, on which the cows can be ranked within the herd from birth, the moment that you have the genome available, and based on the phenotypic expression that is displayed within her own farm environment. And within work page 3 of GenTORE, we really wanted to target lifetime resilience by predicting them using the sensor features from the first parity. And that gives indeed some evidence on how it's done today, because we are predicting a past truth. But at the same time, we see that the variability within farms shows or demonstrated that not all farmers actually use the information that is available. And one of the solutions that we can come up with for that is to target the practical resilience and robustness using sensor features based on their biological meaning. So if we speak about recovery rates, about development rates of perturbations, then we say, okay, what if we do use this information and provide it to the farmer as a way of decision making? I've mainly spoken about resilience for a moment. Of course, we also wanted to target efficiency. The efficiency in the past was defined as feed efficiency. So it takes into account both the milk yield and the feed intake. However, feed intake is really difficult to measure individually on a farm. And one of the potential opportunities there lie in body conditions score trends, both in comparison with herd performance and of course over time, a cow that loses a lot of weight in the beginning of lactation versus a cow that that gains weight throughout lactation. But of course, yeah, the challenge there really is to measure efficiency at large scales. And that is pretty much the last thing that I wanted to do. I think that there is a lot of work to do that can bring, for example, experimental trials together and compare them with the data sets that we have of on-farm high-frequency sensor data. And that's also where the synergies are in work package or in the GenTORE project, that different people are tackling questions from different perspectives. And I furthermore really want to recommend, if this is of your interest, to look at the papers that are already published by either myself and Marieke Poppe and Ahmed Ben-Abdelkrim, because they all contain a little bit more and detailed information. So.
Thank you, Ines. That's great, and so sets the scene to hand over to Isabella. And as Ines says, the information as well as this training will be is available on the GenTORE website in open access as well. So so I'm pleased now to introduce and welcome Isabella Laura from UniPD, who will carry on the story. So thank you, Isabella, over to you.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, Ines. I'm going to talk about one of the outputs that the GenTORE project is expected to produce by the end of the project next year. It is something on which we are working right now from a few months ago. We have started the process of building up this kind of software and application, which I'm going to talk about, but we are still open to any feedbacks that can come from you to improve something that will be a demonstration software at the end of the project. This is basically a monitoring tool, but can become also a decision support tool that is based on the indicators of resilience and efficiency that we identify within the work package 3 of the GenTORE project. And substantially, this will be an instrument that will allow the end users, that will be mainly farmer and generally practitioner of the dairy and the beef sector, to monitor the overall herd resilience and efficiency, the overall herd performances, and to identify the main critical area that needs for intervention. In this case, we are talking about something that works at the herd level and not at the individual cow level anymore, but that will be sensor-based in the sense that it will use data coming from sensor systems available on farm. Okay. We base our idea on these 4 keywords because we want to produce something, a tool, an instrument that have to be simple, useful, and practical for the end user, and therefore something that have a clear interface, that have to be easy to be used by the farmer or by the veterinarian or by the farm advisor, that produce useful information, not too much information, but only the one that are required to give a practical support to the farmer in the herd monitoring, but also in identify the most critical areas for intervention, and that based its monitoring method on the data coming also from sensors. Again, we will base our approach on the resilience definition that we adopted throughout the project. That is finally, the ability of a cow to recalve and to survive. But we can measure it at the cow level and then at the herd level in 2 ways. One more basic way that is based on the core equation that uses the most common data that are available on farm. And this is because otherwise this kind of instrument cannot be implemented in farms that are not provided with sensors. But then we can improve our score resilience calculation by adding all the kind of data that we can find on farm and that can come from sensors and different kind of sensors. To calculate the resilience score of a cow and then of a herd, we identified a series of indicators that will be also the indicators that basically the farmer will use for monitoring the herd performances. As already said, both by Ines and Jonathan, we based the core equation of the resilience score on the ability of a calf to recalve, and therefore the most important parameter that we consider is the number of calvings. But then to distinguish the herd performance or the individual cow performance between similarly performances in terms of calving, we have to consider also parameters linked to good fertility, good health, and good production. The most basic parameters that we can find among farms are those about calving interval, age at first calving for the first lactation, number of insemination per calving, whether they are available, and then whether they are available again. We can include health events. Culling before 100 days in milk is an indicator that we choose because we suppose that culling a cow before 100 days in milk is something not desirable. and then milk production that can be considered as the milk production among a standard lactation length of 3 or 5 days. But then we can shift to an adapted equation for the resilience score, where we can include many different kind of sensor data. For the moment, we have worked mainly with daily milk yield and cow activity, but we can put in also inputs coming from cow feeding behavior, rumination, body weight, and BCS. This kind of data are a good source of data because have a high frequency of recording, but are also very difficult to manage because data sets needs a very hard work for cleaning and for rendering them reliable. The last thought that we have is to base this monitoring tool and decision support tool on a key procedure indicator and benchmarking approach, because we need on one side to identify which are the most important indicators that a farmer look at to monitor the herd situation, but also probably the farmer needs to understand which is the position of his herd compared to a reference herd population. This reference herd population could be made of similar herds in terms of geographical area, in terms of, for example, same association, or even in terms of the same production systems, for example, within organic, or within the same breed, main breed reared. And in this case, the end user can see the position of the herd according to a specific parameters compared to the quartiles of the herd reference population. Based on this approach, this is only a visualization of our idea of the decision support tool. This is not the way into which this will develop it, but only to make you understand our idea. It is something that have to be as simple as possible. The main indicator that end users should see when it opens the dashboard is a counter of the resilience and efficiency score of the herd, which displays where the herd is positioned that day among the reference herd population, and the quartiles that are in different colors, red the worst one and green the best one. And this resilience score can change daily, monthly, weekly, as we will see. The end user can have more detailed information on the trend of the resilience and efficiency score of the herd among time by clicking on it. But then it can go through the 4 main areas that determines the resilience and efficiency score to monitor the herd situation and understand which one of the parameters have contributed most to the daily variation of the resilience and efficiency score. So we have 4 main areas. These are only some example graphs only to make you understand how it will present. But under the production section, for example, you will have information on daily milk yield if you have a sensor, or on monthly or weekly milk yield according to the official controls. Then you can have information on the trend of milk, fat, and protein, somatic cell count, and also some information on the efficiency, feed efficiency of the herd, but not only in terms of trend over the time, but also we will have a reference to the herd population, and therefore how the herd is performing compared with this herd reference population. We have tried to identify the main indicators of interest for the farmer within each main area. About efficiency, for example, we are still working hard because it is not easy to have an indicator of efficiency on farm, because it is really, really rare that on farm the individual feed intake is recorded, both for dairy and beef cows. But nowadays, with novel technologies, or also for the feeding systems, we can do it probably at the earth level, even if in a rough way, but we can have daily information, for example, from automated mixing wagon on the amount of feed that have been distributed. And then we have the information on the amount of milk produced. But on the other hand, other working groups of the GenTORE project are working in developing new technologies for estimating the feed intakes of cows, for example, on pasture, by using drone technologies. Therefore, this is still a work in progress. Then within each area, again, we will have some indicators and some parameters recorded that are always available on farm, such as the monitoring of the calving interval, the number of insemination per pregnancy were recorded, but we will put in always something coming also from sensor systems. In the case of fertility, we are thinking about something linked with the activity recordings, which is very useful for heat detection. But on the other hand, in case of the depressive status of the cows, they can also give information on cow health. And therefore, we are working also on this. About health, we have individuated these parameters, but only because after a survey with a sample of stakeholders, we have understood that we need to put in those data that we are really able to collect on the field. And therefore, here, for example, you can see the fat to protein ratio, which is a rough indicator, but always present indicators of some metabolic disturbances, for example. But also we can have the recording of the health events and see how do they vary among time. If we have sensors on rumination, we can see how the rumination of the herd varies over the time. We can see, for example, that under challenging conditions such as heat stress, the whole rumination of the herd tends to decrease. But when comparing with the whole herd population, we can see, for example, that it is a problem only of that specific herd. For example, because no systems for refreshing cows are present. And in this sense, this could be also a tool useful for making managerial decisions. And then going more into deep, we can also try to analyze the perturbations of the lactation curves, which indicates some disease status of the mammary gland, for example, and we can extract a number of events dealing with mastitis. But again, this is a work in progress. And we also have talked about something on the herd inventory, because we think that from a managerial point of view, having a look also to the situation of the herd in this term is important. We can have an idea of the variation of the aged first calving of our animals, that it is slightly influenced by the herd management, but it is still an interesting data to have on board. But then in the case the herd is not increasing in size, it is interesting also to evaluate the percentage of cows in the first party, because this is a proxy of the culling rate of the herd, and indirectly therefore a proxy for resilience and survival of the cows. Going more into detail, we can have a look at the aged calving of the cows, which is an indicator of the average cow longevity, but also at the days in milk at culling, which again can denote critical situation in the case the cows are culled very early during the lactation period. And as last things, we would like this instrument to be easy to be used, also by creating some kind of alerts. and therefore in the case the resilience score and efficiency score varies in a negative way, we want the farmer be able to easily understand where the problem is, and therefore have some kind of alert that comes up from the different main areas, and alert the farmer that this is or these are the areas that have influenced the more the negative variation of the resilience score. Another way to do it could be, for example, a change in the dimension of the different areas that are influencing the resilience and efficiency score. That can be that can vary, having a higher dimension when the contribute to this variation is higher, or a longer dimension when the duration in time of the perturbation is higher. And therefore, having a quick look, a farmer can immediately understand which is the main area of interest that should be investigated, and on which he has to take some decisions or some actions. Okay, this was a quick look on what we are doing now about this monitoring tool. That is, again, a newborn tool, therefore we are fully open to your feedbacks, even to be able to produce something that will be really useful for the end users. I don't know, Jonathan, if you want to go on with the questions, otherwise I can do it.
I'm very happy for you to carry on, Isabella, and the same plan as before is that we will run through the questions, and then Isabella will stop sharing her screen and we'll do some polling again, and then we'll use the poll, obviously. So I think, Isabella, do you want to if you still share for the minute, and maybe we'll just go through them on the slides, and then I'll just sort of, shall I just maybe run through them, and then, does that be as well, or would you like to do? I don't mind.
Please go. No, don't worry.
Okay. Well, so I think we'll ask these three questions, because as Isabella, and thank you both Isabella and Ines for that section. That's great. What we have now is we're working in this final phase of GenTORE. We have some demonstration software in development, and we have some data, sensor data, that is producing some prototype versions of these outputs. So this is basically where we're working at the moment, integrating data to produce those kind of ranking tools. So therefore, we're interested in your thoughts. We want to understand what are the most important parameters, and what would we look at for herd level, what we look at for individual level, and also your opinions. So would you like to go to the next slide, Isabella, if that's okay? So
doesn't work.
No problem. Well, we'll go to, there we go. So the first question is, if we're looking at herd level decisions, which of these data, and you can select again more than one, which of these data would you like to use for making herd level decisions? And then we'll maybe go to the next slide, Isabella. Actually, I won't run through all of them, if that's okay. And then again, if we're looking to prioritize individual animal decisions, which of these, from daily milk yield or milk yield per lactation, that resilience rank we've talked about, genomics data, health events, stature, calving ease or fertility, whether it's a dairy or a beef herd, which parameters would you want to prioritize? So we looked at herd level first, and then now individual level. Then thank you, Isabella. Will it go to the next slide too? And then finally, really, your feedback about this resilience and efficiency dashboard that's looking to integrate these different bits of information and integrate those sensor outputs that Ines described into the system that Isabella's described, where we can have a practical tool. So do you think this idea is very useful, a good idea but needs improvement, neutral? You've already got so many sensors, you don't want any more, or you don't see any advantage? We welcome your feedback.